U.S. Ambassador to China and chair of the Committee of 100. Guiding the discussion will be Professor Jessica Chen Wise of Johns Hopkins, a leading scholar on U.S.-China relations and director of the Institute for America, China, and the Future of Global Affairs. Thank you for joining us this evening to reaffirm the value of dialogue, mutual respect, and shared humanity in bridging nations. And thank you as well for submitting your questions in advance. If you have additional questions, please enter them in the Q&A box. We will address as many as possible at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the websites and YouTube channels of the Committee of 100, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and APA Justice. At the conclusion of the program, you'll be invited to complete a short survey, and we thank you in advance for your feedback. With that, I now turn the floor to Jessica.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. I'm really thrilled to be here and deeply fortunate to be joined by two trailblazing public servants whose professional and personal lives span both the United States and China. Ambassador Bloch began her distinguished career in 1964 as a volunteer in Malaysia and rose to become U.S. Ambassador to Nepal in 1989. Her public service included presidential appointments at the U.S. Agency for International Development, leadership roles in the Senate and U.S. Information Agency, and fellowships at Harvard. After 25 years in government, Julia entered the private sector in 1993 as Group Executive Vice President at Bank of America. She later served as President and CEO of the U.S.-Japan Foundation. Beginning in 1998, she shifted her focus to China as a visiting professor and academic leader at institutions including Peking University, Fudan University, and the University of Maryland. She is the founding president and executive chair of the U.S.-China Education Trust and co-founder of the Organization of Chinese American Women in the Women's Foreign Policy Group. Governor Gary Locke is chair of Committee of 100. In 1996, he made history as the first Asian American governor elected in the continental United States. He later served as the U.S. Secretary of Commerce under President Obama, and in 2011 was appointed U.S. Ambassador to China, where he became known for his pragmatic leadership and efforts to engage both Chinese officials and the Chinese public. Born in Seattle, my hometown, to immigrant parents from Guangdong Province, Ambassador Locke's life story exemplifies the immigrant experience and the potential of public service to build bridges across cultures, from growing up in public housing to becoming a leading figure in American politics. He brings an unparalleled perspective on governance, diplomacy, and the lived experience of these two different cultures in both public and private life. So I'm really thrilled to be hosting this conversation. I think there's so much of us that we can dive into here. First, I'd like to pose a question to both of you, which is that throughout your respective distinguished careers in public service, you have each found yourself representing both the United States and, in some ways, symbolically also the broader Asian American community. Can each of you reflect on how that dual role has influenced your perspective on U.S.-China relations, particularly as Chinese Americans have often found themselves caught up at times in tensions between the two countries? Julia, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Jessica. And thank you for being here with Governor Locke and me to launch this series of programs conceived by USET, APA Justice, and C100 to explore how U.S.-China relations intersect with domestic politics and civil rights. I can think of no better way to begin than with you both. Between Governor Locke and I, we've broken a few barriers for Asian Americans in government service. Of course, he's done much more than me. But as America's first Asian American ambassador, I realized that I could serve as a bridge between cultures. I also understood that every move I made would reflect not just on me personally, but on the entire community, particularly the women who are still fighting for recognition and belonging. I had broken a barrier, but to keep the door open, there was no room for failure. As I think about it, I should have been quite intimidated, but I wasn't. because luckily my father prepared me well. From the moment we stepped on shore in San Francisco, our port of entry to America, he made no bones about it. Work harder, aim higher, and do better. You're now in America, and there is no turning back. My father's lesson that American citizenship is earned, not conferred, will shape how I view U.S.-China relations. I see Chinese Americans caught in an impassable position, questioned about their loyalty to America, while simultaneously expected to explain or answer for China's actions. I came to realize that it is not enough for Asian Americans to be American. We must continue also to break down the barriers of prejudice, stereotype, and the distrust associated with being seen as perpetual foreigners in our own country. My own experience, from the Peace Corps in Malaysia to the embassy in Nepal, gave me confidence that my Chinese heritage and American identity together could be an asset, not a liability. Teaching at a Chinese school in Malaysia as a Peace Corps volunteer, I discovered that my dual identity opened doors. It allowed me to connect in ways that others could not, to bridge cultural divides and build trust across two worlds. Later in Nepal, I saw how fragile democracy can be, but also how deeply people, ordinary people, believe in America's promise. Even in difficult times, they look to us as a model of possibility. This brought home to me how much I personally owe America, because in what other country could an immigrant woman from China become ambassador? And what's the answer? Mine is only in America.
Thanks so much for that. Ariam, how about you?
Well, thanks, Jessica, for moderating this, and also want to thank Jeremy of APA Justice for co-hosting this along with the Committee of 100. It's always a pleasure to be on any program with Ambassador Block. I have to tell you, I'm not really dressed appropriately for this occasion. I'm at a Mariners game. It's actually starting, and I'm missing the game. But we're playing the Toronto Blue Jays, and if we can win this one, then we're only one game away from going to the World Series. And behind me is the iconic image of Ichiro. And it's really interesting. Culture can bring people together, just as Ichiro, playing for the Mariners many years ago, brought so many tourists from Japan coming specifically to Seattle just to watch a Mariners game. And so following up on what Ambassador Block was saying, these are very, very strenuous times between the United States and China in terms of government-to-government relations, but it's also having an impact on Americans' views of Asian Americans, specifically Chinese Americans, the views of the members of Congress, the members of the administration, the Justice Department, the intelligence community. And unfortunately, it's really an attitude or an atmosphere of fear-mongering that Chinese Americans are not really Americans, but really loyal and to Beijing. So I really think that the idea of trying to bring people together through cultural exchange, people-to-people exchange, is more important than ever before. I don't really believe that think tanks, whether it's Brookings Institute, National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, or foreign policy organizations, or even Committee of 100, or the Asian Society, can really affect and impact the day-to-day operations of Washington, D.C., the White House, and Beijing. But there's a lot that individuals and organizations can play outside. When you think about it, most Americans really have a very fond view of the Chinese people, and the Chinese people have a very fond view of the American people. our disputes are between the governments of the two countries, not with the people of the two countries. And we have to really try to emphasize that and remind people about that. And I think the way to do that is through cultural exchange and people-to-people exchange. Obviously, it's harder for students from China to come to the United States. Very few, unfortunately, students from America go to China. We need to really increase the number of Americans going to China so they can have a better picture of the challenges and the history and the culture of China. Because whether we like it or not, China is going to be a dominant economic and political force going into the future. And whether you're going to be in government, finance, academia, science, or culture, having a greater appreciation and understanding of China can only help one in their future career and to be more successful. So I really think that trying to encourage even exchanges of musical groups, of sporting groups can help at least move us forward toward more of an understanding of people. And I think that's the first step.
Thanks so much for that. I wanted to ask you both, looking at the U.S.-China relationship, how does today's environment kind of compare to previous periods of strain that you've experienced in the past? And what is the same and what is new? Gary, maybe given your experience on this front, maybe you could say a few words.
Well, I can't really speak to prior periods of U.S.-China relations because when I started getting involved in these issues as governor, trade missions to China, supporting China's inclusion into the WTO and most favored a permanent normal trading status for China and the United States. It was really a time of great hope and optimism of stronger ties between the United States and China. And there was this feeling, and perhaps ill-founded or unrealistic or idealistic, that with with China entering into the world stage and being part of the world order, that would lead to greater democratization and openness within China. And I think for a period of time, there was that great hope. But now we're really understanding that China has its own history, its own political viewpoints, and an entirely political system, and that they are really, we cannot really expect them to be a democracy like the United States. So I entered into the U.S.-China relationship at a really optimistic high point, and it got even better, stronger economically, politically, when I was Commerce Secretary, and then obviously U.S. Ambassador to China. And a few years after that, starting in around 2017, 2018, 2020 is when relations really started to become more tense. I liken this period of tenseness to the period when the United States and Russia were at great odds during the so-called Cold War. And I just hope that we do not go down that path. I think that tensions will remain, relations will remain tense for the next several years, but let's just hope that they don't continue to deteriorate and that over time they can improve.
Julia, what about you? How do you see this period comparing to previous periods of tension in U.S.-China relations?
Jessica, you're going to reveal how old I am. I've witnessed multiple cycles in U.S.-China relations, going back to the days when our two countries had no diplomatic ties. Through the hope unleashed by President Nixon's historic 1972 visit. I remember that like it was today or yesterday. The shock of Tiananmen, of course, and the optimism of China's opening and reform and its entry into the WTO. But today's environment feels fundamentally different and far more troubling. What's new is the totality of suspicion. Until recently, we could disagree on government policy without demonizing an entire people or civilization. That line has dangerously blurred. Even at the height of the Cold War, we never securitized educational or cultural exchange. On the contrary, the Fulbright program was alive and well. Exchanges thrived. As the United States and the Soviet Union sent, I think Gary mentioned this, students, artists, scientists, and musicians across the Iron Curtain, American jazz bands toured Moscow and Leningrad, the Bolshoi Ballet danced in New York, symphony orchestras, theater troupes, and professors crossed borders at the height of the nuclear standoff. These exchanges didn't erase our differences, but they reminded both sides of our shared humanity. They built understanding in the midst of confrontation. And indeed, I learned to love the ballet after I saw the Bolshoi and Nureyev dance. And to this day, I associate ballet with Russia. Both governments understood that ignorance is dangerous. The ignorance is the foundation of hatred. They kept exchange channels open, not because they trusted each other, but because they knew that shutting them down could lead to miscalculation and even catastrophe. Today, we are dismantling those channels with China while calling it our chief competitor, if not enemy. Closing doors to exchanges and treating practically every contact as suspect. That is not strategic. And it cannot make the US stronger or safer. That's my opinion, but just the opposite. It makes us blind and insular. And we see the consequences here at home in rising anti-Asian hate, in the suspicions cast on Chinese American scientists and students who have done so much to make this country strong. I am myself a product of education exchange, as my father was a Boxer Indemnity scholar who was the first Chinese to graduate from Harvard Law School. By the way, I don't think we would have ever gotten to America had he not been a Boxer scholar. It was his classmates at Harvard who helped us get to America. I've seen how education and cultural exchange can break down barriers that politics builds up. What I worry about in US-China relations today is that we're losing something essential, our ability to see each other as people first. If we let fear close our minds and our borders, we risk creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where competition becomes conflict simply because we've constrained or eliminated the forces that allow for anything else. I hope we can stop on this track.
Thank you for sharing those profound words. I wanted to draw you both out a little bit further on what exactly is being lost when the ties between our two countries are so strained for the Americans whose families, professional networks, commercial transactions, these span both countries. What is being lost here? What are we missing?
Well, I think we're missing further innovation and advancement of our societies, and it's not just America or China and its peoples that are hurt, but really the entire world. I mean, so many of the issues alone or by China alone, but can only be solved by China and the United States working together, whether it's halting the proliferation of nuclear weapons in North Korea, fighting global terrorism, finding cures for cancer, or addressing climate change. For instance, on climate change, if China keeps doing great things to reduce carbon emissions, but America does nothing, then all the efforts of China will be for naught. At the same thing, if America does significantly reduces its carbon emissions, but China does very little, then all of our sacrifices are for naught. Americans produce more greenhouse gases than any other country in the world per person. We produce more greenhouse gases per person than any other country in the world. China produces more than any other country in its totality than any other country in the world. Of course, they have 3 times the population of America. But again, the 2 countries are really responsible for an overwhelming amount of carbon emissions. And the world 100 years from now will not care about the innovations and the principles of liberty and democracy that America stands for, or the great historical contributions of China over centuries in terms of the printing press, the compass, the clock, et cetera, if the world has tipped over the precipice of irreversible climate change. The world and historians and the future population will just blame both China and the United States. In terms of collaboration, we need to work with each other to solve some of these pressing issues of the world. And when we close ourselves out, it makes advancement in all of these issues, whether it's going to be finding cures for cancer, to innovation of products, much slower. And that's to the detriment of both workers in America, workers in China, and ultimately the people who would benefit from those innovations. That constant technological advance, people throughout the world will be deprived of that.
Jessica, I might add something here. I so agree with Governor Locke, but I think we're not just losing achievements. We're not just losing connections. We're losing the ballast that has historically kept the relationship stable, even in turbulent times. And perhaps most tragically, we're losing empathy. Knowledge alone isn't enough. It must be paired with empathy. The ability to stand in another's shoes, to see the world through their eyes. Together, knowledge and empathy create what I call strategic understanding. And I think it's a true national security asset to have that. I learned that lesson as a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia. Living and working in a small town taught me that empathy doesn't begin with grand gestures or great achievements. It begins with everyday human contact, sharing a meal, teaching a class, learning another language, listening more than talking. Those experiences shared how I saw the world and how I practiced diplomacy. What we risk losing today is not just programs or expertise, but the lived experiences that instill empathy, humility, and understanding. But we, I think, still know how to rebuild them. And I am hopeful. By reopening classrooms and labs, restoring exchanges, maybe the Fulbright program can come back, and encouraging young people to see the world for themselves. We can renew the human connections that turn what I see as rivalry into respect and competition into coexistence. That's all I would add.
Thank you so much for that. I think one audience member has asked us this question. It has become popular in DC to say something like, love the Chinese people, hate the Chinese Communist Party. Do you find this sentiment helpful, unhelpful, or perhaps nonsensical to bridging the 2 countries? And I want to share that a recent survey that the Committee of 100 did with researchers at the University of Chicago found that 55% of Americans say that US-China relations negatively impact how Chinese Americans are treated. More specifically, 54% say that Trump's messaging on China negatively impacts how Chinese Americans are treated. And the survey findings are actually nearly identical when Asian Americans at large are considered. And so I want to ask you, how do we strike the right balance here between addressing kind of legitimate national security concerns regarding China and protecting the civil rights and liberties and contributions of Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, including scientists, students, scholars and business professionals. Where do you see the line between addressing legitimate security concerns and what borders on racial profiling?
Well, getting back to your question, Jessica, I think it is appropriate and good to say America has disputes with Beijing, the government, the Communist Party leading the People's Republic of China, but we don't have quarrels with the people of China. Because I think it's really important that we understand that these issues are government to government. And because by bifurcating people versus government, we therefore need to then focus on the common humanity, as Ambassador Block was talking about, of the peoples of America and China. I think it's really important for political leaders, from the members of Congress to governors and mayors and obviously the White House, to say, yes, we have a concern about national security as it relates to certain aspects of Chinese government actions and policies, but we don't have a quarrel with the people of China. It's important that our political leaders make that type of a distinction and statement. In the absence of that type of differentiating statement, if they just say, oh, China and Chinese people are bad, then of course it's going to create negative impressions and hostility toward Chinese Americans and people of Chinese ethnicity throughout the world. You know, right after the September 11th attack against the United States, President George W. Bush was in office at that time, and he held a cabinet meeting. And they were talking about how to respond to that attack. And what's great about President Bush is that he said to the cabinet, we need to make sure that what happened to the Japanese during World War II does not happen to Muslim Americans here in our country. So yes, he differentiated that. And that's why we need political people and people in the business community and leading figures, whether they're in the arts and culture and entertainment or sports, to constantly make that differentiation.
I would just add this. Governor Locke, having been ambassador to China, obviously knows this issue clearly. But I think we have to recognize that we have legitimate national security concerns. Intellectual property theft, technology transfers to military applications, espionage. These are real issues requiring serious responses. But the line between legitimate security measures and racial profiling is equally real. And we have to recognize that. Security measures are targeted, evidence-based, and focused on behavior, not ethnicity. Racial profiling assumes guilt based on what we look like and on our ancestry. And as Governor Locke mentioned, history shows us where that road leads. We've been there before. The Chinese Exclusion Act, the internment of Japanese Americans, who can forget that? And more recently, the China Initiative, which cast a huge wide net over Asian American scientists and ruined innocent lives as well as careers. When Chinese American scientists face extra scrutiny for collaborations, their white colleagues pursued without question. We've crossed that line. When students are denied visas or interrogated at borders simply because of their Chinese ethnicity, we've crossed that line. From my years in government, I know that effective security is about precision and proportionality. So broad brush approaches don't make us safer. They bury genuine threats under a mountain of false leads, waste limited resources, chasing after innocent people, and drive away the talent that keeps America competitive and strong. I think we must be clear. What are really security measures and what is racial profiling. And language really matters. You mentioned that as well. And again, I repeat, it has been harmful language that led us down the road to McCarthyism, as well as what I mentioned, the China Initiative. Each time, fear and harmful rhetoric trampled our values and weakened our democracy. These were not just moral failures, they were strategic disasters. And we do see echoes of that today. And that is really something that we need all to work on to prevent. And I hope we can do that.
Well, just to follow up on what Ambassador Block said, we're also seeing that now with the, not only do we have the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Japanese internment, but we also have the alien land laws forbidding Asians from even owning land in the early part. It wasn't much of the 20th century. Much of those laws were not repealed until like 1950s or 1940s. We're now seeing a reincarnation of those alien land laws. Various states have already passed laws that prohibit people of Chinese ancestry, along with other folks from different parts of the world, Iran, North Korea, so forth, from owning even residential or commercial property. Wow.
But that reminds me that during the pandemic, anti-Asian hate surged, fueled by fear and irresponsible words. Language matters, I repeat. When leaders use race-coded rhetoric to score political points, it doesn't stay on the airwaves alone. It spills into the classrooms, the subways, and streets, often harming and killing innocents. And that's tragic because Asian Americans have been important to America's story. We just don't promote that enough. Let me just take a moment to name a few. Of course, Gary, Governor Locke, you're on the top of the list. But we have to remember also that scientists like Stephen Chu, innovators like Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, Lisa Su of AMD, and Eric Yuan of Zoom, who kept us connected through the pandemic. Where will we be? We're on Zoom right now. Public servants like Norm Mineta, Elaine Chao, and Gary Locke proved that leadership and patriotism have no color or accent. So how do we, US and China, compete without hate? I think we have to lead with clarity, fairness, and respect. We compete vigorously, but without losing our humanity. And we tell the fuller story of Asian Americans as bridge builders, patriots, and innovators who make this nation strong. Because in the end, America doesn't win by fear. We win by conviction in our values, in our democracy, and in each other.
You're here. I couldn't agree more that defining success in U.S. policy has to center this basket of issues, the vitality and the inclusiveness of our democracy here at home. Last spring, our institute at SAIS put out a report called Getting China Right at Home, in which one of our contributors, my colleague Ho Feng Hung, wrote that, quote, "It is counterproductive to try to combat anti-Chinese racism while ignoring Beijing's efforts to weaponize the Chinese diaspora for influence operations, espionage, and transnational repression. A more collaborative and compassionate approach to national security is needed," he wrote. And so I wanted to ask you to, in follow-up, how can the United States government work with Chinese community organizations like Committee of 100, like US CSET, to monitor Beijing's efforts to exploit Chinese Americans? And what can be done more to reassure these communities that their contributions are part of what make America so great?
Well, I think organizations like the Committee of 100, API Justice, and all the many organizations on campuses who deal with faculty should be working to educate Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, especially in the scientific technological fields, about some of the traps that are out there and some of the ways in which Beijing may be trying to extract information improperly from Americans, and especially Chinese Americans and researchers. We need to help each other. We need to help our own folks understand what the so-called pressure points are, or the flash points are that the United States government is going to be looking at or concerned about. And these are very legitimate national security issues, of course. As loyal Americans, of course, we want to make sure that we are safe, and that the hard blood, sweat, and tears of our own people, whether they're in the private sector or at colleges, universities, or researchers, are not taken away and just stolen and stolen away, given all their hard work and blood, sweat, and tears. And so, but we need to help each other, just not just say, watch out, but what are the tools? How can they? How can we help them fill out all these different, bureaucratic forms and that the U.S. government requires when you're applying for a grant and so forth? And so I think that there are things that the Asian American community, the Chinese American community, and other organizations that are involved, for instance, Chinese American academics, can do in order to protect ourselves, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think that, are we still on?
Yep, you're on.
I think our government must work with civil society, because civil society is much closer to the ground, to the people. And I think fundamentally, we have to begin by not defunding so much of what civil society contributes, not defunding universities, not defunding nonprofits. I think if civil society, can stand united, can stand together, we're stronger than just doing things individually. But I think first we must persuade, we must convince our government that we add value. And Gary, I don't know how we do it with this government. Maybe you can tell us. You can enlighten.
I don't have any answers. I'm very concerned about what's happening in terms of the rule of law and how the Justice Department is being politicized. When I used to give lectures in China and elsewhere around the world about what makes America so unique and so different from other countries, including China and countries in Asia, I said it's our rule of law. That it doesn't matter whether you're an individual citizen or a major corporation, we're all equal in the eyes of the law. And that an individual can sue the U.S. government, can sue the president of the United States. I said that they can even sue me when I was governor, and many of my friends sued me when I was governor. I mean, I did not take it personally. They were representing a particular issue or a group, and it was their duty, it was their obligation to use the legal system if they felt that I and my administration were doing things improperly or incorrectly. And I would say to folks that it's like a basketball game. The referees don't always get it right. And I'm referring, making an analogy to the judges. The judges don't necessarily always get it right. But by and large, you think the referees are trying hard and they make good decisions. And so that's why you continue to play. You lose the game, but you go to the next game and you try again because you have ultimate faith in the integrity of the system. But if you don't have faith in the integrity of the system, then what do other countries resort to? They resort to violence on the street, to revolutions, to the armies and the military taking over. That's what distinguishes America. It's our rule of law. I'm afraid that that's being sorely tested.
A question from the audience, or a couple of them bundled together. At a time of such tension between the United States and China, what avenues remain for Americans to sustain meaningful exchanges with China? How do we encourage young Americans of any and all backgrounds to go to China, especially with programs like Fulbright, suspended, Peace Corps as well? And then for immigrants who want to contribute to both U.S. society and China's development, what are some constructive ways that they can do so responsibly?
Well, I think, first of all, that what we're doing right now is what can help. Maintaining dialogue, keeping channels of communication open. Those of us who can should continue to do so. But how do you then enlarge the pool of those who are able to participate in this exchange? Because on both sides now, it's gotten so difficult to do anything constructive. And I think the only thing that I can suggest is the U.S.-China Education Trust, for one. We have been really working on the residues of friendship, residues of goodwill that we have built over 25 years. And I think that we need to do more of that. I do think that people-to-people exchange establish goodwill that goes on despite government-to-government disagreements and tensions. So I think Governor Locke said it earlier, we have to do more of that. I think we have to find common ground, seek where there is at least some possibility of working together, like issues that also already mentioned, like climate change, like cultural exchange, I think can still continue. We need to find ways where our mutual interests, because there's still mutual interests, our mutual relationships between Chinese and American peoples. We need to tap the strength, the possibilities that those relationships offer. I think that's the only thing we can do right now, because I think the relationship, the government-to-government relationship, has reached to a point where it's always tit for tat. For example, a question for Governor Locke would be, what will happen if we really impose the 100% tax on China?
Well, first of all, I just want to reemphasize what Ambassador Block said. We really need to somehow focus on more of the cultural people-to-people exchange and highlighting the contributions of Chinese Americans throughout all of American society. The fact that, Chinese Americans, including my father, served in World War II, was part of the Normandy invasion, and we have so many distinguished Chinese Americans who have given their blood, sweat, and tears, not only in the military, but in science and technology, Nobel Prize winners, distinguished academics and leaders in business and industry and academia. We need to emphasize the incredible accomplishments and the loyalty of Chinese Americans in this country. The second thing is no one benefits from a trade war. The cost of goods will go up, and that impacts both the consumer, but also the workers of both countries. So much of what America makes and produces is highly desired and held in high prestige around the world. If we impose huge tariffs, which are a tax paid for by the consumer, it's not a tariff is not a tax paid for by the Chinese government. It's paid for by the Costco's of the world, the Targets, the Walmarts, when they import those products in before they can take them off the docks and ship them to their distribution points. They have to pay this tax, a tariff. Well, if Costco and Target and Walmart have to pay a tax of 100%, so if the item costs Costco $50 wholesale, and they now have to pay $100 for it, you know darn well that they're going to pass that on to the consumer. And so the American people will suffer. At the same time, fewer products are shipped and sold to America, which means fewer jobs for the Chinese people. China will retaliate and put huge tariffs on American goods going to China, which means fewer American products being sold to China. And if you sell fewer things, American companies don't need as many workers to produce those things. So it means job losses in the United States. And we're already seeing that, for instance, with farmers. The Chinese have stopped buying soybeans grown in America. They're buying it from Brazil instead. And so a lot of the American farmers are on the verge of bankruptcy, and the list goes on and on. The fact is that no country makes everything that it needs. And so, whether it's avocados or kiwi and so forth. So America makes oftentimes more than it needs, more than it can consume. So therefore, we want to find other countries and people to buy our products. Well, if we expect others to buy our things, we've got to be willing to buy things from them as well. So, this world trading system, it has some flaws, it has some defects, it has some shortcomings, and those can be shored up and remedied with, trade agreements and so forth. But to cut off all trade between each other would be devastating for the people of both countries and ultimately around the world.
Another question here from the audience. Is there a way for this sort of U.S.-China tension to continue, as many predict it will, for the ensuing decades, without the Chinese diaspora, Chinese Americans suffering in turn? I mean, I think that the pressures here are great, and this may just be the beginning. And so I guess, what advice would you have for those in the community seeking to both thrive and survive this period, but also to contribute constructively to reducing tension where possible, and promoting cooperation where it is?
Well, let me just jump in first, and I'm sure Ambassador Block has more comments about this, but we have very tense relations with Russia. We have very tense relations with other parts of the world, but we don't stigmatize the people of those countries. And maybe it's because, as Ambassador Block says, we are the perpetual foreigner. I mean, with our black hair, except mine is gray right now. And, we're always, visually different from Caucasian groups. I mean, the Irish, when they came to the United States, faced a lot of discrimination. Polish, the Jews, Russians, and so many other groups. But they assimilated, and you can't really tell a German versus a French or a Swiss or a Norwegian, really. But Asian Americans, whether we're Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, or Chinese, or Indian, and along with African Americans, we're always more physically distinguishable. And so maybe that sets us apart, which is unfair, obviously unfair, but it puts a burden on us. I really think that political participation and political involvement has to be part of the solution. We need more people, Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, at the table setting the policies that affect all of us. And so when we are more commonplace in the state legislatures, in the city halls, in the school boards, in the Congress, in the governorships around the country, I think that helps elevate and perhaps will help differentiate between people of Asian American, Chinese ancestry versus the government of Beijing.
I couldn't agree with you. Really couldn't agree with you. Asian Americans need to more vigorously participate in the political process. But let me try to answer this question both as a Chinese American and as the first Asian American ambassador. Because this question, the heart of your question, breaks my heart. How would you feel, those in the audience who are not Asian Americans, if you are viewed with suspicion and hostility in the country you call home? How would you feel? Chinese and Asian Americans have that feeling all the time. None of us how prominent or how lowly can escape that. Being seen as a potential threat because of one's ethnicity is a deep violation of trust. And it's not just Asian Americans who suffer this. We've already talked about the Japanese Americans, something that we swore would never happen again. Yet here we are, once again asked to prove our loyalty. And Gary, I really do believe that is because we are still viewed perennially as perpetual foreigners. We can take practical steps to protect ourselves, know our rights, document our work, use our voice to speak up when discrimination occurs, and support organizations that stand up for our rights. Yes, support them with money. Like APA Justice, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and the Asian American Scholars Forum. We also need to vote, Gary, as you said. Speak out and stand together. Asian American participation in the political process is unfortunately diluted because Asian Americans are not united. If we unite, there will be greater strength and greater impact. But let's be clear. We should not have to prove our loyalty more than anyone else or choose between our heritage and our country. My own life is proof that America at its best can embrace both. I came here as a child of immigrants, and this nation gave me the chance to be an ambassador. That's the promise of America, the America that we know that we must defend. So yes, I think that we can take steps to at least try to protect ourselves. But the greater task is to change the environment that makes that necessary. How we do that, I think it's above my pay grade. Because when any of us are treated as foreigners in our own country, we all lose a piece of what makes America strong and worthy of our loyalty.
And if I could just follow up on what Ambassador Block said, it's not only that we need to support our own organizations that will try to address some of the challenges facing the Asian American community, Chinese American community, whether it's APA Justice, Committee of 100 and others, but we also need to support and form collaborations with other civil rights groups.
Absolutely.
Because we need, all of us concerned about civil rights and civil liberties need to support each other, because we can't expect that the Asian American groups can do it on their own. We need allies. And so we need to support their efforts in fighting discrimination and injustice if we want them to also help us in our times of need.
Last question for both of you. What is the greatest challenge facing Chinese Americans today in the United States? And what is one strategy you would recommend to address it?
Unite, vote.
Get involved. Get involved. Make your presence known, and be proud of our contributions, and tell the stories. Let the story be told of our success and our contributions, our blood, sweat, and tears. We have given our blood, sweat, and tears for the prosperity of this country. We deserve and have an obligation, a responsibility to be at the table, setting the policies that affect us all. So in this time of stress, we cannot shy away. In fact, we have to engage more than ever before. And that means, as Ambassador Block said, register to vote, vote, be involved. And, for some of us, I would encourage, we would encourage you to run for office. It doesn't have to be a huge office. School board. In many cases, the school board setting the education policies in our communities is perhaps the most important position there is, affecting the young people of our country, not only our young people, but all the other people in the community whose values and perceptions are being shaped at an early age.
I would add, believe in yourself, believe in ourselves, and be confident, and tell the stories of those who have achieved so much for America, for no other country but America. Do more of what we're doing now, talking, sharing, and promoting ourselves. Asian Americans find it difficult to do that. I know, but we must tell our stories because no one else will.
Thank you both. I don't recall the last time I felt inspired by a Zoom webinar, but you two really, it's been such a privilege to share this time with you. Thank you both for all that you have done to contribute to our great country and for your inspiring example and words of encouragement. They mean so much at this time. Rosie, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jessica, as well. Really appreciate all you're doing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jessica.
Well, let me just join in the thanks and extend on behalf of the organizers and the audience who I was just a member of a few minutes ago, just nodding along in agreement to so much of what was being said. So please join me in the audience in thanking Governor Gary Locke, Ambassador Julia Chang Block, and Professor Jessica Chen Weiss for a really inspiring and powerful discussion. We were really happy to hear it. So we're delighted to see so many of the folks online stay for the length of this webinar, and we really hope you'll join us for the next one. So as we stated at the top, this is the first in a three-part series between these organizations focused on this question of the impact of U.S.-China relations on the AAPI community here in the United States. And the topic for our next event in the series is the Global Competition for Talent and International Students. And we'll be holding that discussion in mid-January, and we really hope to see so many of those who joined us today online for the next event. So to stay in the loop, to hear about that event and other events coming up from these organizations, we hope you'll follow us on social media, sign up for email news alerts, and we can see you back here. And just as a reminder, as we plan for that webinar and our upcoming programs, we ask that you complete the post-webinar survey and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear what topics and programs that you find interesting so we can continue to develop our programs with your feedback in mind. And very lastly, we ask if you enjoyed this program that you consider donating to one of our organizations, and you should find QR codes on the screen to be able to direct that to the organizations who are involved in organizing. So with that in mind, this webinar is recorded and will be posted online afterwards. We thank all of you who stayed on and joined us live early in the morning or late at night, wherever you are. And we hope to see you online for the next one. So thank you so much.
Great. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.